Miyazaki uses 35 seconds just for the title and Valerie's poem. He takes his time, and after a whole minute, we finally begin to see an old house in the morning mist. Inside the sliding doors, we see Jiro, the protagonist, sleeping. And this takes another 30 seconds, which is also a long time for one scene. The morning mist flows over a rice paddy, and it's very beautiful. This is a lost landscape, one we don't see anymore. The typical Japanese landscape of rice paddies has mostly disappeared. He shows all these sites that would eventually vanish. He shows things that have now been lost. The most striking image is this rice paddy in the countryside. The middle frame is the open sliding doors. Here in the storyboard, he uses the term sohoka. Sohoka is basically a family that is not of high social class, but is nonetheless wealthy. Not an official or the head of a village, or a lawmaker or a lawyer or a doctor, but an old rich family living in the countryside. Miyazaki specifically tells the animator that this is a wealthy old family. Jiro Horikoshi is 13 years of age. Miyazaki devotes 10 seconds to the rice paddy, 5 seconds to the sliding doors, 25 seconds to the sleeping Jiro, so it's very slow. It is set in 1916, in the Taisho era, 3 years before the Great Depression and during World War I. The open sliding doors indicate that the servant is already awake. We tend to look at Jiro, but we have to realize in the second frame that the sliding doors are open and the servant is already awake. The servant wakes up way before the kids and opens the shutters one after another. I told you about the things we've lost. Well, this is one of them. And not just the rice paddy, but the whole class system that was vital to farming. Some people were born into families with high status. Jiro's family didn't have high social status, but they were wealthy. Poor people were sold to wealthy families to work as servants. They had to get up very early in the morning and open the shutters while the children were still asleep. This class system is one of the things that Miyazaki shows as having been lost, irreplaceable, beautiful things. Usually, class systems are considered unjust and are depicted in a negative light. But in this film, Miyazaki includes the class system among those beautiful things. We'll talk about this class system in detail this week and next week. Jiro climbs up on his roof in his dream. This may be too small to see, but he is walking on the roof. Take a look at how he walks. Oops, this is upside down. Sorry. For those of you who recorded the film, I want you to take a look at this scene again. He first puts his right foot forward and then his left foot. But can you see how his foot is turned in? Can you zoom in on my hand, please? He's not walking straight. His leg is turned in on his second step. This makes him look very unstable. Miyazaki intentionally made him walk like this to show that he's walking on a roof. This type of realism can only be seen in Miyazaki's animations or in Ghibli animations. Usually when people praise the drawing skills or the acting of the characters in animations, they're talking about how well they are drawn. But Ghibli characters are believable and real, and this is something you don't see in any other animations. So if you recorded this, make sure you watch it again. And then you see his handmade bird-shaped plane, and when Jiro gets in, he places both his hands on the frame of the plane, and then carefully lowers his body in like this. This is also something you should check. Jiro gets on his plane, his dream plane, and turns on the switch. This gray switch here. This gray part is made of bakelite, which was still rare back then. Bakelite was a material used for black phones in the Showa era. It's similar to plastic, but it's very malleable and insulin. So it was often used for electronic products. This was back in 1916, before the Showa era. So you can see that this boy was quite the studious. He knew a lot about science. This bakelite shows that. The propellers start to rotate when he turns on the switch, and strangely, the plane rises a bit for a second. When Miyazaki was interviewed by an airplane model magazine, he was asked, "Is that a catapult? Is that a catapult to launch aircrafts?" And he says, "No, it's not. The aircraft just floats." Of course, it's scientifically incorrect, but that's because back in that period, people knew about airplanes and had actually seen them flying. But most of them had never seen a plane actually take off. You have to go to an airfield to see that. Most people had only seen aircraft in the air and they thought that they floated. Miyazaki says that only the people who lived near an airfield knew that the planes had to taxi before they took off, and that the planes had to continue running even after landing. The reason why Miyazaki included this scene is because it is linked to the title, The Wind Rises. The plane needs wind blowing against it in order to fly. Wind in this story is a metaphor for adversity. Pain and struggle in this story are always depicted as wind. The Great Kanto earthquake, fires, the Sino-Japanese War, the death of his beloved, Nahoko. All these tragedies that happen in Japan, or to Jiro himself, are represented by the wind, the strong wind blowing against him. Planes create strong headwinds by taxiing before they take off. The wings can only develop the lifting power to fly by fighting the wind that blows against them. That's the meaning of this title. But 13-year-old Jiro doesn't know that yet, that you need headwind in order to fly a plane. He thinks that the plane automatically floats in the air. He is still young in this scene, so he has not yet experienced any adversity and doesn't know the meaning of it. He must understand that in order to fly his own plane, he needs the wind that fights against him. In order to make this ideal, beautiful plane that he has in mind, he must experience a strong headwind that will blow everything precious away from him. This is the meaning of The Wind Rises. No matter how strong the wind, he carries on. Otherwise, he couldn't have made such a beautiful plane. This is a sign that Miyazaki is using this metaphor as the basis of his story. That's why he shows this innocent, young Jiro in the beginning. But Jiro gradually begins to understand the meaning of the wind and tries to create his own plane. So that's what this film is all about. Are you all with me? We've still only covered the first 2 minutes of the film. Are you all with me? Okay, let's move on. Commentary number 2. This is only the first 2 minutes. Now the 13-year-old Jiro is still sound asleep. Our protagonist is still in his dream. Jiro's bird-shaped plane lifts off from the roof and rises to a level where he can see the rice paddies around him. And the land is lit by sunlight. It's a beautiful scene. The rising sun turns golden and the rice paddies are flooded with light. Such a dynamic scene. This is the main highlight of the opening. Even the sound is great. You hear a roaring sound and the music changes its tone. You see a lot of beautiful sunrise scenes in Miyazaki's films. The most famous one is probably in the Laputa Castle in the Sky. The morning after Shita spends the night in Pazu's house, the sun rises as Pazu plays a tune on his trumpet on the roof. The light pours into the valley and turns golden. Miyazaki depicts the sunlight in an indirect way. He shows the birds flying and shows the beauty all around it. He even includes Shita's voice saying, "Wow!"